All right, so let's actually start for real this time. Okay. It was 21 and 22, but it's going to be 22 and 23 today. So chapter 22 was our diseases of the respiratory system. Getting to our defenses, reminding you guys of those. This is going to be including things like the nasal hairs that trap things that you breathe in through the nose. We also have mucus and the moisture of our mucosa that traps microbes as well. We have alveolar macrophages that will move in the alveoli of the lungs, little pockets and crypts of the lungs that basically are involved in our gas exchange there. Then we have secretory IgA, which is going to be found in all of our mucosa. Any of your moist surfaces of the body will have IgA expressed in that mucosal area to add with immune protection there. And we also have I think I mentioned earlier, but just to make sure that in case I didn't, the ciliated epithelium that will be associated with constantly moving things out of the body. I forgot to actually turn the camera on. So there we go. Not that I look great or anything. I literally just put a sweatshirt on. So whatever, but this will be solidified on YouTube for all time. Me waking up in the morning and putting a sweatshirt on and coming and giving a talk. So whatever. Moving on. So let's talk about the normal biota. In the respiratory tract, we have a lot of bacteria. We have the yeasts that could be things like Candida, and then we have protozoa that can also be part of our biome. And so we have a large variety of microbes that can be part of the biome of the respiratory tract, as well as when we talk about the GI tract. But with the respiratory tract, there are a lot of microbes that can be part of the biota that can become pathogenic if they overgrow or if they move to different parts of the body. And some of these would be Streptococcus pyogenes, the cause of strep throat, bacterial pharyngitis. And then we have the subtitles are not doing their best work, are they? Haemophilus influenzae, Streptococcus pneumoniae, Neisseria meningitis, and Staphylococcus aureus. These are all possible pathogens, but just because you have them in their biome doesn't mean that they're going to be a pathogen for you. As long as they're in low numbers and as long as they're in the areas that they belong in, then they aren't going to be causing pathogenesis. So the diseases of the respiratory system that we went over, we started with the common cold. The common cold is in fact a syndrome. It is defined by its signs and symptoms and not by its causes. It's also known as rhinitis because you do have inflammation in the nose, but that inflammation can spread throughout the respiratory tract. And then that would be causing other signs and symptoms in those areas. The signs and symptoms related to the common cold are almost always related to the immune response and how the immune response will be instigating inflammation and things like that. So it's usually not caused by damage caused by these pathogens. There's over 200 viruses that can cause a common cold, and the common cold really is a viral disease by and large. And so these will include viruses like rhinoviruses, coronaviruses, adenoviruses, RSV, and then the inflammation and the infection and the progression of those two things over time lead to the likelihood that you'd be more susceptible to secondary infections, probably caused by overgrowth of your own biome and things like that. And this would include things like sinusitis and otitis media, which are ear infections. Again, usually overgrowth of those bacteria when they are moving into those parts of the body. Moving on to pharyngitis. Pharyngitis is inflammation of the throat, and our major causes of bacterial pharyngitis will be Streptococcus pyogenes and Fusobacterium necrophorum. Streptococcus pyogenes produces several toxins that are derived from having been infected with a bacteriophage that then imparted those genes whenever the bacteriophage inserted its genome into the bacteria's genome. And that is called lysogenic conversion. And so we call those pathogenic strains of Streptococcus pyogenes, we call them lysogenized or lysogenic strains. So they are able to make these virulence factors like those toxins that lead to a lot of the effects and the capsules and things like that. Those virulence factors, some of them are imparted by bacteriophages. The strep throats also can mimic the surface antigens of their human host. And so that can lead to presentation of like autoimmune effects, which can be temporary, but it also, in some, more rare cases, can lead to a permanent sort of effect of the autoimmune, reaction. And so complications of pharyngitis, we have scarlet fever, which is the rash associated with strep throat. And then rheumatic fever, which is where you have inflammation affecting the heart and cardiovascular system. And that is usually associated with the autoimmune effects of having strep throat. And then glomerulonephritis, which relates back to our type 3 hypersensitivity. Then the Fusobacterium necroform is more associated with peritonsillar abscesses, which then that infection can become systemic and become life-threatening as a result of the spread of that bacteria. Next, we have whooping cough. Whooping cough is also known as pertussis, and it's caused by the bacteria Bordetella pertussis. The DTaP or Tdap or DTP, there's a lot of different versions of it, but that the Tdap or DTaP vaccine, these protect from pertussis, protects from tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. Pertussis has 3 different phases. The catarrhal phase, which is your initial like prodrome, it's the initial cold and flu-like symptoms. Then we have the paroxysmal phase where we have the uncontrollable cough and that whooping of trying to catch your breath in between your coughs. And then the convalescence phase where we have the bacteria is leaving the body, you're clearing up that infection from pertussis, but now you've had so much damage done to the respiratory epithelium. The cilia have become so damaged, you're usually very susceptible to secondary infections from other pathogens and opportunistic pathogens. So, and it can take a very long time to recover from that. It's a very long-lived disease as well with whooping cough. I say long-lived, but compared to like the cold or the flu where you will be sick for maybe a week or two, that whooping cough is usually something that lasts a lot longer. Moving on to RSV, this is respiratory syncytial virus. It's pretty similar signs and symptoms to the common cold and can be considered a cold virus. But in little babies that are 6 months or less can have severe presentation, severe respiratory symptoms that can lead to, secondary effects of like pneumonia and stuff like that can become life-threatening. All right, next we have influenza. Influenza is a virus that causes the flu. On the surface of influenza, we have hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. The hemagglutinin is for entry into the cells. It's like the key to the door on your cells. And then neuraminidase just helps with, entry of the cell into your respiratory mucosa, breaks down the mucus, and also helps with budding the virus out of the body whenever we're having viral reproduction. And a lot of flus are basically defined by which type of H or N they have. Tamiflu is a great drug for treating influenza because it affects the neuraminidase ability for helping with the budding of the virus and preventing it from being able to break down the mucus. But it's usually better given earlier on in the infection because later in the infection, at that point, the viral load is higher, and taking Tamiflu isn't going to help with preventing signs and symptoms because the virus is already spread so wide throughout the body. So better to take Tamiflu the early stages of illness if you are taking Tamiflu. Next is the antigenic drift and the shift. So antigenic drift is when you have just natural random mutations just from the environment or just from errors made during replicating the viral genome. Whereas shift is where you have 2 different viruses, maybe one from like we saw in our example, one from a duck and one from a human, and both of them infecting a pig host, and then parts of the genome of the duck can reassort in building up the human virus, and then suddenly we have a part duck, part human virus, which is something that the population has never seen before. And that antigenic shift is usually what's attributed to pandemic level flu spread. Creates basically a whole new virus. And tuberculosis is, a lower respiratory tract disease caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is an acid-fast bacteria that has mycolic acid on its surface. It's diagnosed usually using the PPD or mannitol tuberculin skin test. Chest x-rays are commonly used to look for those granuloma type tubercles that form in the lungs. The lesions in the lungs often are, what happens is the bacteria get eaten up by the alveolar macrophages, and that's actually where the bacteria like to live. But then the rest of the immune system tries to wall the bacteria as well as the infected macrophages off, and that creates those granulomas anytime that the immune system is trying to wall off infection. That's what a granuloma is. And so those granulomas then can kill off the stuff that's inside, and then that can become necrotic, but doesn't kill off all the bacteria either. And so then the bacteria can become dormant and then resurface as reactivation tuberculosis, which is where we see those typical symptoms of consumption associated with tuberculosis. Those lesions, because of the necrosis of the tissue, the bacteria, and the white cells that are in the middle dying off and breaking down, become caseous lesions, sort of like a more solid pus, basically. So all the white blood cells in there in the tissue that gets trapped in those like granuloma structures that we call tubercles. Then that can dry out over time and become calcified, but the bacteria can still remain in there and then reactivate when the immune system becomes weaker. That PPD skin test is relating to our type 4 hypersensitivities from chapter 17. It is your CD8 T cell response, so it does take, 2 or 3 days for that to reactivate and then activate to the antigens being injected in the skin. And that's where the memory comes from. If you have seen tuberculin in your life, it's usually going to be associated with the bacteria, and you will have had a CD8 T cell response. And that's what we're looking for in that skin test. And then we talked about pneumonia. Pneumonia is another syndrome because it is defined by the signs and symptoms. Again, here usually start off with an upper respiratory tract infection, and then the causative agent, bacteria, virus, fungi, whatever it is, will move deeper into the lungs and then populate there where the inflammatory response will take place and cause fluid to move into the area along with the immune factors. But the fluid then fills the alveolar sacs and then prevents our body from able to be doing proper gas exchange, which is why you have such extreme fatigue and basically cyanosis from the lack of oxygen, because we can't get that gas exchange going in the alveoli. And that's the progression of pneumonia. So we talked about some of the causes of pneumonia. Most cases are going to be viral, typically caused from whatever was causing your common cold or the flu or something. And most cases that are viral are going to be less severe, but the bacterial ones are the ones that we're more concerned about and the ones that can cause more serious effects and need medical treatment. And so Streptococcus pneumoniae is the most common cause of community-acquired pneumonia. The other type of pneumonia, other than community-acquired, is going to be hospital-acquired. So that's your comparison there. And so the most common cause is going to be Streptococcus pneumoniae. Mycoplasmas cause walking pneumonia, where you have a less severe presentation of that cyanosis and fatigue associated with that lack of oxygen, but you still do have fluid buildup in the lung, and that is caused by those mycoplasmas, the ones that don't have the cell wall. So they do also cause a community-acquired pneumonia, and that's walking pneumonia version, which is atypical presentation because you don't have that severe risk with that loss of oxygen there. But the more common one, definitely Streptococcus pneumoniae. Other bacteria can also cause pneumonia. We talked about Legionella causing Legionnaire's disease, hantavirus causing hantaviral pulmonary syndrome. That can also, depending on how your immune system reacts to that virus, can lead to hemorrhagic fever as well. Haemophilus influenzae was a bacteria, and then Histoplasma capsulatum was a fungal version that was more commonly associated with low immune system function, like with HIV. And we talked about pneumocystis jirovecii, which is also associated with HIV. Again, usually the fungal pneumonias are going to require a lower immune function in order for them to really cause pathogenesis. Healthcare-associated pneumonias are usually a combination of different kinds of bacteria and has a very high mortality rate associated with it, usually because these people are already hospitalized, typically from some other thing. So they've already got trauma going on in their body. They've already got inflammatory reactions going on from just whatever put them there to begin with. And that's going to make you much more susceptible to any environmental bacteria taking hold, let alone putting in respiratory equipment and then creating a pathway that isn't protected from things like IgA and, lysozyme and your ciliated epithelium, because we're removing that, because now we're just relying on the tube. I mean, it's still there in the body, but it's not going to be able to react as well if we're just putting a tube in there to help microbes just move straight into your lungs. And so that's the bigger issue with respiratory equipment, introducing environmental bacteria into the respiratory tract where it doesn't belong, and without the body able to control kind of the progression of those microbes. I'm not clicked on the right thing. All right, next is chapter 23. This is on the screen. Chapter 23 was our diseases of the GI tract. Of course, your normal gut biome protects us as well as provides digestion processes and trains our immune system on what to react to and what not. But your normal gut biome is also very closely linked to other physiological aspects of your body, including your mental health, your propensity for gaining weight or losing weight, and all sorts of other effects in the body. Those microbes and the waste products, signaling molecules, toxins, and all the things that they're associated with making, those things have a wide range of effects on the body throughout the entire body system. So our first thing that we talked about in the diseases was dental caries. It's the most common infectious diseases in people, usually caused by strep mutans and strep sobrinus. These guys form biofilms on your teeth, by using like their capsules or their slime layers and just adhering and then building up on each other, and then other bacteria and protozoa and stuff can also build in on those biofilms that are forming. That's what's going to form plaque. Periodontitis is a gum disease and the tissues surrounding the teeth. And what happens in periodontitis, and then we'll also have the caries associated with like the decay of the teeth itself. But with periodontitis, less common than dental caries, but still a huge, huge problem. Starts off as just gingivitis, which is inflammation of just the gums. But then as the inflammation continues, can lead to the effect of the underlying tissues, including the bone. And you can actually have permanent bone recession as a result of the inflammation present from bacteria and the inflammation that they cause. Right, so if you have Methanobrevibacter oralis as part of your biome, then you are going to be at an increased risk for periodontitis. And Methanobrevibacter oralis is an archaea. It is not a bacteria, it is an archaea. It is a completely different thing than bacteria, even though they look similar under the microscope and have similar effects on the body. Their physiological level, completely different makeup, and just different structure. We didn't talk much about the archaea because they're not usually implicated that much in like human diseases, and they're usually considered more likely to be like our extremophiles, the guys that live in like the extreme environments of the world. But this guy is one that can be part of your microbiome in the oral cavity. Anyways. Trench mouth is whenever you have it's a much quicker and more severe presentation of periodontitis and gingivitis that leads to necrosis of the tissues and biofilm formation that can lead to pseudomembrane formation. It's usually going to be multiple bacteria that are going to be involved in this, and that can include Fusobacterium necrophorum that we talked about in a respiratory tract. So moving on to gastritis and gastric ulcers. These are commonly caused by Helicobacter pylori, which is a very common bacteria found in about half of the population, and it is treatable with antibiotics. Then acute diarrhea. We talked about a lot of diarrhea. Acute bacterial diarrhea. This is when you have loose stools, 3 or more loose stools in a 24-hour period. And the acute version is whenever you have those over a course of less than 14 days, but once you've passed 14 days, then you're getting into the chronic diarrhea. So Shigella, the species of Shigella more commonly associated with causing severe disease will be Shigella dysenteriae, produces an enterotoxin and shigatoxin, which are associated with causing inflammation and damage to the lining of the intestine, leading to dysentery, which is bloody and mucousy diarrhea. Salmonella enterica, and Salmonella enterica is like the species, and then there's a serotype called typhi, But that these cause diarrhea as well as gastroenteritis, and the typhi serotype is much more severe version. Campylobacter is definitely the most common of the bacterial diarrheas. It's not documented as much just because people don't usually end up needing healthcare for it. Usually we'll get over it in a few days, but it is easily the most common bacterial foodborne illness, and most places don't test for it very regularly, just so you know. It's not required by the FDA to test for it. Place in all of this. All right. E. coli, there's a lot of different E. colis that we talked about, but S-Tech or E. coli L157H7. E. coli S-Tech is Shiga toxin producing E. coli. E. coli is motile and Shigella isn't, and so that's one of their features about them. But this is just E. coli that can produce that Shiga toxin, and so it got those genes through various different versions of genetic transfer that the bacteria use, the horizontal gene transfers, including, just to remind you guys, because you know it's coming up, right? Transformation, picking up the outside DNA, conjugation, swapping the DNA through like the channels that are formed that we call the sex pili, or through transduction, which is whenever viruses transmit the DNA. And then that would be what we would call lysogenic conversion, which is the more likely case for Shiga toxin, is probably a result of a lysogenic conversion event. Anyways, moving on to C. diff. Clostridioides difficile, used to be Clostridium difficile. C. diff causes a pseudomembranous colitis. It is gram-positive bacteria. It is endospore forming, and those endospores are really hardy and hard to get rid of. And so this spreads like wildfire in hospitals where people are already taking antibiotics to cure or prevent infection. And so it clears out their biome, and then C. diff is happy to take up those stadium seats and overgrow and cause its effects. Diarrhea is best treated with fluids and electrolyte replacement. That's the best treatment no matter what kind of diarrhea that you have. We can treat with antibiotics if the body isn't managing the infection effectively, but typically we're just going to let it run its course and treat with fluid and electrolyte replacement. Cholera is a disease caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae that causes rice water stools. We have massive exodus of fluids and electrolytes out of the cells in the body and then being dumped out through the intestinal tract. And this can become deadly with how dehydrating it is, and can lead to coma and death from the loss of the fluids and the electrolytes. Cryptosporidium is a protozoal disease. The cysts are resistant to chlorine, so this is a common one in swimming pools. Norovirus is the cruise ship virus, and most commonly associated with diarrhea outbreaks on cruise ships, but you can get norovirus outside of cruise ships. So it's not only found there. I want to be very clear about that. It's found in society, and then society brought it into the cruise ships. Rotavirus is more common than norovirus, but it just doesn't cause a very severe presentation of diarrheal disease. It can be more severe in younger kids, so there are vaccines available for it. Food poisoning is a term referred to diarrhea and nausea and other GI symptoms that are caused by the toxins produced by bacteria that are on the food. You don't necessarily get infection from the bacteria that cause food poisoning. Y'all, my husband last night, because I was taking down the test, I had my late night class last night, which I don't think if there's anybody even on here that's from my night class. I don't think so. No. So yeah, it's just Brandy and Heather. Of course it is. Anyways, no offense to you guys watching the recording later on, but anyways, so last night I had like this really severe pain in my abdomen. I've had it before. I knew exactly what it was. It was pancreatitis. And I have it like probably once or twice a year, sometimes more often, just depending on what my body wants to do in life. And so I don't know. I just ate some pasta salad before I went home. After the SEM lab, I ate pasta salad, and then I came back to work. And shortly after getting to work and getting ready to start my class, I started having this massive pain in my abdomen, and it was rough. I will say like an 8 on the pain scale. And I was like sweating and all this. And I was like, man, this isn't good. And so I had to go get some antacid, came back down, started doing the Kahoot. And I was like, I'm not going to make it. It started coming back again. And so I just brought the antacid bottle back down from my office. And I mean, it was bad. I thought I wasn't going to be able to do lecture. It was causing me like double over in pain and everything like that. But I don't know what's going on with that. I went to the ER for it one time, and those doctors at the ER were like, well, you need to stop drinking alcohol. You stop drinking. And I was like, my guy, I don't drink alcohol. I might have a drink like at a social event, maybe twice a year, like a couple of drinks. I'm past that phase in my life. And I don't really get that much enjoyment from it. Have a margarita, maybe, a couple times a year or something. Like, I don't drink. And he's like, well, sure, you need to stop drinking. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I go to my doctor and, know my doctor for like a decade or something. And I'm just like, yeah, so I guess it's been longer than a decade. I hate how old I've gotten. It's been a long time. It's been 15 years I've been seeing this freaking doctor. So anyways, go to this doctor. And I tell her that, and we do a blood test, and the blood test this time comes back normal. And so we haven't been able to like track down like what's causing it, but whatever. It was cripplingly painful. So I called my husband on my way home after the lab exam. The acid helped, and I was able to recover, and we went on with the rest of our day. But after the last lab final, I was tearing down the test, and I called my husband on the way home. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. And I tell him, I'm like, yeah, my stomach was really hurting. He's like, yeah, my stomach is hurting too. He's like, I got home from work, and I mean, I've just had diarrhea. I've been nauseous and all this stuff. And it was like right after just a little while, a couple hours after we went to, Olive Garden. And I was like, well, what did you get? And he was like, I got the soup and the salad. And I was like, oh, you have food poisoning. And he was like, no, it's probably E. coli or whatever. I'm like, no, it's food poisoning. He's fine. He's back at work today. So yeah, it's food poisoning. And so what's going on there is with him, I don't know what's going on with my pancreatitis, but what's going on with him is he had eaten probably salad or something that people had touched with their hands, and then staph will grow on that. And it's not enough to cause an infection in your belly. Those guys won't survive. The bacteria won't necessarily make it into your GI tract, but the toxins will. And the toxins will make it in there and then cause the signs and symptoms of diarrhea. And then once your body clears out the toxin, you get over it. So almost every time that you are having a brief bout of GI illness after you're eating something like that, if it lasts less than 24 hours, it's almost always going to be staph that causes it. Other bacteria can do this, and both of the other two examples that I give are endospore-forming bacteria. These are Bacillus cereus and Clostridium perfringens, that they might live in or on the food that you consume and then produce the toxins, and then you ingest the food, and the toxins are what are making you sick because they made it through that GI tract and were able to lead to that diarrhea and everything like that. So these are self-limiting when you have food poisoning. It's just a matter of the body clearing it out. And there's no like, medication or anything for that. It's just letting it run its course. All righty. EAEC is a cause of the chronic versions of diarrhea. So this is enteroaggregative E. coli. And then we have some protozoal causes of chronic diarrhea, which was Giardia, Cyclospora, and Entamoeba. Those are all going to be protozoal ones. Cyclospora is going to be your typical gastroenteritis that is going to be chronic presentation. It's fecal oral transmission. Whereas giardiasis is going to be usually transmitted from like wildlife and water contamination from wildlife's water contamination. It is fecal oral as well, but like more commonly associated with water contamination from that. And that's when it leads to the greasy malodorous stools, a very long-term flatulent sort of presentation of chronic diarrhea. And then Entamoeba histolytica causes a dysentery version. Moving on to hepatitis. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver, and this may or may not cause jaundice as a result of that. Let's see, hepatitis A is a fecal oral transmission virus, and there are vaccines for it. Most people will recover just fine from hepatitis A on their own, and it has more common to have like a subclinical or even asymptomatic presentation with this infection. It's a pretty common one and isn't super severe, but can lead to severe effects, and so that's why we have the vaccine for it. Hepatitis B is a DNA virus that has reverse transcriptase. Again, whenever its DNA is going through transcription and translation to make the protein products of the DNA. DNA gets made, transcribed into RNA, and then that virus uses a reverse transcriptase to turn the RNA into the DNA, and then inserts that DNA into your genome, and this can lead to cancer as a result in the liver. And so this is transmitted by a small amount of blood. So this is blood and sexual contact that will transmit this one. There is a vaccine for hepatitis B, but there isn't really effective treatment, but people can recover from hepatitis B more easily, naturally, over time, given time to deal with that. Whereas hepatitis C is going to be a more chronic presentation for the most part. Most people aren't going to recover naturally from it, but there are drug treatments for hepatitis C. And hepatitis C can also lead to cancer as well. The longer, more chronic that disease becomes, more likely the cancer is going to be. There's no vaccine for hep C, but there are drug treatments for hep C. All right, and the hep C is transmitted by a true blood transmission. So it does require intravenous blood transfer, typically. So that's going to be through transfusion or through intravenous drug use, like needles and things like that. Are the Helminth diseases. Most of these Helminth infections are what we call neglected tropical diseases, things that aren't getting funding because it doesn't interest the more developed worlds to put money into those things. And so they're pretty under-researched, and it's going to affect mostly underserved populations, the poorer populations of the world. We see this more in what we call third world or underdeveloped countries for the most part. So we had, oh, and this reminds me with pinworms. Pinworms. So right, we're going to talk about these guys. Starting off with pinworms, this is caused by the worm Enterobius vermicularis. And I had spoken in my lecture previously saying that we treat the pinworms with ivermectin, but that was incorrect. We treat typically with pyrantel. I don't know why. It's like I said it one time and it came out of my mouth, and then my mind like clung onto it, which I know is a problem for some of the people that are studying, that they'll see something or write something or whatever, and that thing sticks, but it doesn't always serve them in the future. So that happened to me. But yes, Enterobius vermicularis, the pinworms, we usually treat with pyrantel, which is a anti-helminthic drug. Pyrantel, ivermectin, and praziquantel are our most commonly used anti-helminthics. But yes, whipworms, this is caused by the worm Trichuris trichuria. Large amounts of eggs and larvae produced from this, and this can lead to loss of the tone of the muscle tissue in the intestinal tract. Ascaris lumbricoides is the giant intestinal roundworm. It is the most common of all the helminth infections in the world. We don't have it in the United States, which should put that in perspective, considering we talk about pinworms not being uncommon here. Tapeworms, again, tapeworms are a type of flatworm, and flatworms, for all of our helminths, the flatworms overall are called platyhelminthes, and the tapeworms are called cestodes, and the flukes are called trematodes. So you know this stuff is coming up again, so just reminding you guys. So our tapeworms are cestodes. This would be Diphyllobothrium lodum, which is associated more with like sushi and raw fish, and Hymenolepsis, which are rat tapeworms and are associated with mostly with animal populations, so people can get them as well. And then Taeniosolium, which is our more famous tapeworm, the long one that consists of the different segments that we call proglottids, and those proglottids can break off and they contain eggs, and then that's how this would be transmitted through the fecal oral routes. But these guys also can form these like encapsulated structures. They were what we call encysting, E-N-C-Y-S-T. Encysting is one of these worms, and a lot of them can do this, can form these capsules inside of like muscle tissue or other organ tissue in the bodies. And then when you eat that, that's what typically leads to the transmission of these guys, and they will form an actual worm in the gut. But if you eat the proglottids, people normally present with something called cysticercosis, which is where we'll get those cysts in our muscle tissues or in our organ tissues, and especially in the brain, which is called neurocysticercosis. Next, the Chinese liver flukes. This is Opisthothorchus sinensis and Clonorchus sinensis, and these guys will basically like aggregate in the bile duct and block the bile duct and have similar signs and symptoms to gallstones. but can also have like the inflammatory liver presentation just associated with the infection. Trichinosis is caused by the trichinella protozoa, or not protozoa, I'm so sorry, the helminths, the worms. And again, do a similar thing where they will encyst in the muscle tissue. They'll migrate, get them from fecal oral transmission, but you mostly will get them from eating undercooked meat. And so when you get it from undercooked meat, then you're going to have your GI presentation. And then that'll be the initial stage where you'll have feeling sick and have GI presentation. But then the worms are able to migrate into your tissues in your body and then form their little capsules in the muscle and organ tissues of the human body, leading to diffuse presentation of inflammation, puffy eyes, and systemic inflammation as a result of these guys being pretty much throughout the tissue of the body. Intense muscle pain and joint pain as well associated with that. Undercooked pork is the most common cause of spreading that. And then schistosomes. Schistosomes, these are flukes. They're what we call the blood flukes. This is Schistosoma japonicum and Schistosoma masoni. They get in through intact skin in water. And so the schistosomes have a life cycle where they have a stage of their cycle in snails. And so the version of the schistosomes that comes out of the snails are the ones that move into the fresh water and can migrate in through the skin. And when they do that, it causes an itchy rash that we call swimmer's rash associated with that. They can also migrate throughout the body, through the bloodstreams, and cause disease in the liver, which is where we have the most severe presentation of the disease as it progresses. But it can also cause issues with the spleen since they live in the bloodstream. So splenomegaly, hepatomegaly, liver disease, and these guys can also migrate into the bladder and like cause issues with the bladder being able to empty as well. So that's pretty good. Moving on to our most missed topics from these chapters, we'll start back with chapter 22, our respiratory stuff. So our first one is the itis issue. So we've been talking about itis for a while. And so just reaffirming that whenever we're talking about anything called itis, it means inflammation in whatever that tissue is. So pharyngitis is inflammation in the pharynx, which is the throat. Laryngitis is inflammation in the larynx, which is where your vocal cords are. Meningitis, inflammation of the meninges, the covering of your central nervous system, and etc. So, yeah, and I have my little thing to remember when it's itis, it's inflammation in a crisis. Whatever that's for, but yeah, itis is inflammation of whatever that the tissue is. So meningitis, we have inflammation of the meninges. This is not inflammation of the brain, which would be encephalitis. Is it inflammation of the covering of the brain? Yes, that is what the meninges are, the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, and the pia mater. The inflammation of the spleen would not be, that would be splenitis. And inflammation of the uterus. I mean, there's I'm trying to think of like the word for the uterus. We have hysterectomy. I don't know if it's hysteritis or uteritis. I don't think they call it that. But you're usually going to be referring probably to the individual tissues within the uterus more often than not. But yes, so meningitis, inflammation of the meninges. Which term refers to an inflamed throat? So your throat is your pharynx. So this is your throat. Inflammation of the throat would then be the itis with that. So pharyngitis. So again, I'm sure this seems simple enough, but some people get that mixed up. So if I say pharyngitis, I'm not talking about the pharynx, I'm talking about the inflammation of the pharynx, right? I'm moving on to whooping cough. Whooping cough is also known as pertussis. It's caused by the bacteria Bordetella pertussis. And the DTaP or Tdap, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of different versions about this one. And it just depends like what company is making it and all of that stuff. But that Tdap or whatever vaccine, tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis, they commonly come all together. The 3 phases of pertussis, first you'll have, first of course you have your incubation phase, but once you start having presentation of the disease, your first phase will be the catarrhal phase, where you'll have cold-like symptoms. The second phase will be the severe coughing phases, with that whooping sound, as the patient tries to breathe in between the coughs, and this can last anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. So you have like a month or so of that. And then afterwards, your convalescent phase, where you will have recovery of the whooping cough disease, but a severe loss of your ciliated epithelium of your respiratory tract that makes you more susceptible to secondary infections. All right. Say when if I want to say anything about this. I have that I can't play chess correctly, but this will be the incubation, the catarrhal, the paroxysmal, and the incubation, catarrhal, paroxysmal, convalescent. And then the carefully part of it is talking basically about the fact that convalescence, you have the convalescence of the disease, but then you also in that convalescent phase are more vulnerable to secondary infection. Okay, so the pathogen that causes whooping cough. So this one is Bordetella pertussis, which is a bacteria. And how is the paroxysmal phase of pertussis defined? So remember, catarrhal will be the cold-like symptoms, catarrhal cold. The paroxysmal, the pertussis thing, this is going to be that hardcore coughing, severe coughing fits, and that need to breathe in between that. That part of it is the whoop of it. And then we had the convalescence, which convalescence always means the recovery part of the disease. All right, next is tuberculosis. This is caused by the bacteria Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And just like all Mycobacterium, this guy is acid-fast because it has mycolic acid wax on its surface. This also makes it more resistant to the environment. We diagnose this with that tuberculin skin test with X-ray looking for the tubercles with that acid-fast stain. There are immune tests that can be done for it as well, but like our basically holy trinity for diagnosing tuberculosis will be that skin test, the X-ray, and the acid-fast stain. The tubercles, again, the macrophages will come into your lungs and phagocytose those bad guys by recognizing them by their antigens and stuff. I had tried to have AI create an image, and I don't know if you've ever had AI create images. I know you've seen that AI will create images and not quite get things right, but it's definitely not quite getting things right here. If you actually like look at like the writing on it, what is this? So anyway, so I just shared that because it's a cool looking image, but it is AI generated and you can tell. And I even asked it to make sure the words were actually properly words, and it's not even after that. So AI is not smart enough for that yet. But anyways, so the tubercles form whenever the macrophages eat up the bacteria, and then the immune system tries to wall that off, creating these granulomas. And then we get necrosis, and then creation of those caseous lesions that can harden and become calcified. And that's what tubercles are. The skin test is relying on your CD8 T cell memory of having seen the bacteria before. And since these are inside bacteria, they live inside the macrophages. That's why it stimulates the CD8 cytotoxic T cell response. And so you would have memory for that. And it takes a couple days for it to activate, which is why you have to wait 48 to 72 hours to look at the results of your PPD skin tests. What molecule present on the surface of Mycobacterium species is unique to the species? Mycobacterium is unique to the species and is used as a common identifier for diagnosis. So Mycobacterium, all of them, if you hear Mycobacterium, your brain should automatically be thinking acid-fast. And if it's acid-fast, that means it has mycolic acid, which is the waxy coating that makes it more resistant to environmental factors. It helps it like survive longer in the environment outside of the host. And it also has that waxy coating that helps us with identifying it using the acid-fast stain. What type of pathogen causes tuberculosis? Mycobacterium tuberculosis is in its name, luckily this time. This is a bacteria. Moving on. Influenza is a virus that causes the flu. The surface molecules hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Hemagglutinin is for attaching to the host cells, neuraminidase for breaking down the mucus, for budding, and for causing cell fusion. Tamiflu is used to treat influenza because it blocks the function of neuraminidase. Antigenic drift was our random mutations just from errors in replication or just from environmental factors causing mutations, whereas shift is when we have reassortment of gene segments within a host. And then we have some more information about the flu down here and how we're defining antigenic drift and shift. And and their frequency and their effects on flu evolution, if you will. So drift is small, shift is huge. So shift with the H, huge change. This is where we have that genetic segment reassortment within a new host. So drift is small and shift is huge. What is the term for the alteration of the influenza virus genome due to minor errors in the genetic sequence of the virus due to random mutations? Minor is small to me, so we're looking for antigenic drift. And so this is, I'm not going to be this mean on the test, but we had that Kahoot question where I had said pathogenic drift and pathogenic shift. Yeah, be aware that it is antigenic drift. All right, what is antigenic drift? The drift is the small changes. The small changes are just from random mutations and environmental factors. So is this when mutations in the genome of the virus happen randomly? Yes, it is. So this could probably be our choice. When segments of the flu genome reassort within the host, this is the shift. When the flu virus obtains an extra genetic segment, this is not a thing that happens. Doesn't get extra ones. It just swaps out the 8 that it's supposed to have when we have the shift. When the flu virus loses one of its genome segments, again, it's always going to have the 8 genome segments. It can interchange those segments with other flu viruses if we have more than one virus infecting the host. But drift is when we have those smaller changes, and so it's going to be A. All right, moving on to chapter 23. These are our GI diseases and most commonly missed topics for the GI diseases. Cryptosporidiosis. When I took immunology in undergrad, I had an immunology professor. He taught immunology. He didn't teach microbiology. And I remember in class him asking me what type of an organism, if anybody remembered what Cryptosporidium was. And I had said at the time incorrectly, I was like, I'm pretty sure it's a fungus. Now I remember, because later on, I remember looking back in my notes for microbiology later on that day and like realizing that it was a protozoa. And I have not forgotten it since then, because I was at that moment where I was like, oh, I told the professor the wrong thing. Yeah, cool. Well, as I'm sure you guys have learned in my class, if not in other classes, professors are just humans too, and they sometimes make mistakes too. And we have our own issues with recall and things like this. So cryptosporidiosis. Cryptosporidium is a protozoa that has a cyst and a trophozoite form, and the cyst is the one that is resistant to chlorine. And so those cysts, we call them oocysts, but you don't need to worry about that. I'm just going to call them cysts on the test. They can survive the acid of the stomach and everything like that. And so these are going to get into the body and cause profuse watery diarrhea. It's fecal oral. It's usually transmitted through contaminated water. It can survive chlorination pretty well for that. Crypto can cling to chlorine and cause chaos in the colon. So Cryptosporidium is a protozoa. Cryptosporidium is a protozoa. It causes diarrhea. Can't spell diarrhea. And then, let's see what else about it. The cyst is resistant. Chlorine. All right, so there's your little notes up here. Let's get to our questions. Which of the following is the primary mode of transmission for Cryptosporidium? The cyst resists chlorine. This is important to remember about it. We know chlorine, chlorinated water is where this is going to be the issue. So is it airborne? No. Is it with contaminated water or food? Yes, probably this one. Is it insect bites? No. Is it contact with soil? No. It's going to be mostly water or food. Why is Cryptosporidium difficult to eliminate from the water supply? Well, I'm going to assume it's going to be one of this. So let's look at our choices. Does it form spores that are highly contagious? Well, it doesn't form spores, so don't get confused here, because protozoa don't form spores, they form cysts. And so this isn't going to be our answer because that's not correct for these. Does it produce toxins that persist in the water? It's not the toxins, it's going to be literally these cysts. They are resistant to chlorine. Does it survive extreme heat and boiling? It's not going to survive that, but whatever with this pen. So it's going to be the cysts. Next is Hep A, specifically Hep A, and people were having some issues with in previous exams. So hepatitis A, this is a virus. It's going to potentially cause liver disease that may cause jaundice. It is transmitted by the fecal oral route. Most people have subclinical or minor signs or symptoms. It's not usually a severe disease, though in some cases it can become severe. And most people will recover fully without permanent issues. No sequelae usually associated with this one. And there is a vaccine for this. All right. Hep A, okay, I like this one. This was one that I liked. Hep A is from a plate. You get it from food and water. You get it from ingestion, okay? And you can avoid it with a vaccine. Hep B and C are blood and contact, right? And they can't be curbed. C can't be curbed by a jab with a vaccine. So C can't be curbed. All right, moving on. I kind of like that one. That wasn't the worst one that I have on there. All right, what is the primary mode of transmission for Hep A? Hep A is from a plate. This is going to be fecal oral routes from food and water. Okay, so we'll look for that. Is it from blood and body fluids? No. Is it airborne? No. Is it fecal oral through contaminated food or water? Yes. Is it insect bites? No. Which of the following is true about Hep A? So does it cause a chronic liver disease? No, most people recover without any problems on their own. Can it be prevented with a vaccine? Yes, it can. Are there any other choices that might be better? Is it primarily transmitted through blood and sexual contact? No, that's going to be Hep B. And Hep C is transmitted really only through blood contact. Is it commonly treated with antiviral medications? You usually don't need antivirals. So this is a thing that could trip some people up on a test, right? You would see, oh, it's a virus, you treat it with antivirals, but now you don't need it for this one. Most people recover on their own without any treatment. And so this is going to be B. It can be prevented with a vaccine. Alrighty, schistosomiasis. These guys are flukes. So remember with our helmets, these are our worms, and that these are animals. They're all multicellular creatures. So helmets, they're animals and they're multicellular. So we have basically the round worms and the flat worms. Just remind you guys that we're talking about the worms here, the parasitic worms. So you have the round worms and the flat worms. Round worms are called nematodes. Oh, come on, pen. And the flat worms are called platyhelminthes. Right, platy. This is an A. And there's two different kinds of platyhelminthes flatworms. These are going to be the tapeworms and the flukes. The tapeworms are called cestodes, and the flukes are called trematodes. All right. And then we have some overview of the disease and the immune response and things like that. Again, schistosomes have a life cycle in snails, and so this is transmitted in freshwater bodies of water. And what happens is that the feces and urine of people that are infected aren't treated, and they're returned back to the water where people are bathing and getting their drinking water from and everything like that. So these are easily prevented with proper like sewage treatment and water treatment and things like that. But then what happens is you poop or pee out the schistosomes. They have a life cycle step inside the snail. The snail releases the schistosomes that can then get inside the body through the intact skin. These are blood flukes, They live in the bloodstream. The liver and the spleen are going to be the most heavily affected organs from this, but you can also have certain species of schistosomes that will also aggregate in the bladder and cause issues with the bladder. The rash is common from what the entry site, how these guys get in. They're able to cover themselves with antigens from the host, and like they take proteins and molecules from the host bloodstream and just like coat themselves with it. So schistosomes swim, stick, and settle as skin-penetrating snail scent flukes. I think this pretty much does kind of cover everything about that, but let's move on and see if we can answer some questions about these guys. So schistosomes are blood flukes. If they are flukes, these are flatworms, platyhelminthes. And then the flukes are known as, oh, come on. The flukes are known as trematodes. What else do I want to say? They get in through intact skin in the fresh water. And they can cover themselves with the antigens. Cover with host antigen to hide from the immune system. Okay, so I've got some notes down about these guys. Let's see if we can answer some questions. How does schistosoma infect the humans? So this is this one, intact skin in fresh water. So it's usually contaminated water, and then a life cycle step in the snail, they release the guys that get into the skin. So do we ingest it through contaminated food or water? We don't ingest it. Does it penetrate the skin during contact with contaminated fresh water? It's probably this one. Airborne, no. Direct contact, no. So it's going to be B. And what type of organisms are schistosomes? They are flukes. Like we said, flukes are a type of flatworm. Flat platyhelminthes, like the tapeworms, are also platyhelminthes, but then platyhelminthes is divided into the tapeworms and the flukes. And the tapeworms are the cestodes and the flukes are the trematodes. So just to summarize that stuff. All right, so that is it for our review for week 15 and our respiratory and gastrointestinal disease chapters. Do you ladies have any questions for me before we go? Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys. And I will see you next week. And remember, you can always email me during your study processes. And happy studying. We've only got one more week of class left, and then the final is here somehow. So have a good weekend, and I will see you guys later.